This is the Everton Byline. We are back for a 33rd time. I am Matt Jones. Joining me as ever is Paddy Boyland. We are here to talk about all things Everton. Paddy, it feels like it's going to settle down for a little bit over the next 2.5 weeks. It just feels like things might be a little bit quiet. But how do you feel like that? Do you welcome it at this time of the year compared to previous campaigns?
I definitely welcome what is seemingly an end to the end of season relegation scrap. I mean, even last year, I suppose it went down to end of April, really. We went to Luton, and at that point, we kind of knew Everton was safe, so it was fine. Obviously, that would have come a lot sooner had Everton not been deducted 2 lots of points, totaling 8. But we all know the reasons for that, don't we? And this time around, it's a different kind of dynamic, far less stressful, I would say, as a journalist, which is nice. Probably far less stressful for anybody supporting the club as well, given where Everton have been. And not only have we got that kind of clarity and certainty on the pitch, I mean, Everton will be a Premier League outfit for all intents and purposes next season, barring something really mad. But we've also got, I feel like, a lot more of a surer footing in terms of the finances of the club and those kind of big burning existential questions as well. So the answer is yeah, definitely. I think we've all needed that break from a relatively incessant negative news cycle and really tough few years. But then the challenge for a journalist is to kind of keep things interesting, to keep people reading, to keep people listening or watching or whatever it may be. And I think what we've got right now is I would describe it after the Thelwell Kinnear news. That for me was the one big pillar that needed to be decided before the summer. And I think we will have a trickle of other things. And you're kind of seeing that with what's happening with Colin Chong and his role, which we'll talk about, and contract renewals and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's any kind of big bombshell at the moment that's waiting to be dropped. And certainly not until probably early in the summer and maybe May into June. So maybe a little bit of a lull and therefore a different challenge. But after the 3 or 4 years we've had Matt, like, if that's the worst problem in the world for somebody covering Everton, that's probably absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that in mind, next week we're going to sort of do a question and answer show. In lieu of any major news breaking, we could have like contract. I don't know. We might come and discuss, but we have got questions for us about anything to do with the club at the moment, or anything to do with Everton from a journalistic point of view. You might be interested in. Do get in touch with us, either at the Blue Room EFC on Twitter or on Blue Sky. I'm at MattJFootball on Twitter. You're at Paddy_Boyland, I think, on Twitter.
I'm about 99% sure that's correct. But we also need to flag the one other place where people can contact as well, Matt.
The email?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are evertonbyline@gmail.com as well. We've had loads of emails coming in. So many Blues out in Chicago who have been, should be getting jobs on the Chicago tourist board because they've been talking that place up to a great extent. So great to hear that.
Now.
Yeah, it is getting exciting. We've also had some correspondence, Paddy, that I did want to flag up from last week's show. I don't know if you've seen this one. I don't know if I mentioned this to you. So we had this comment on Spotify from S. Anderson7, who said, excellent as always, which obviously we really appreciate. And following on from us asking for information about Matt Woods, who wore number 32, he said, I actually know Matt Woods. His son and my son went to school together. After Everton, he went to Chester. And any chance he gets, he's still up for a game. So there you go. Matt Woods still doing the business at this stage of his career. These are the stories we want, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. So if you've got, if anyone's got any correspondence they want to send in about the number 33s today, I'll be astonished, put it that way. But I would welcome it nonetheless if it did. And just one other point as well I wanted to bring up before we get into the show. We are looking to build and expand this podcast. And I think me and you, Paddy, are now... I'm certainly in the Everton Dar phase of my life. You're probably edging closer up to it. And we are very much old man shout to clouds when it comes to social media and video and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So we're kind of looking for somebody to come and help us. If this sounds like you're interested, do get in touch with us at any of those avenues mentioned. To potentially grow this podcast with videos on social, Twitter, or X is called now, Instagram, TikTok, all that kind of stuff. Potentially it'll be ideal for somebody who's maybe students, maybe somebody who's in sports journalism, obviously an Evertonian as well. If it sounds like it's up your street, do get in touch with us. If you'd fancy helping us out with the podcast and getting involved a little bit more. Like I said, we are trying to grow it, trying to get in front of and in the ears of as many people as possible. So do get in touch with us, preferably at the Everton Byline at gmail.com email address.
Yeah.
And let us know what you're about, what your Everton credentials are, what your journalism credentials are. It'd be great to hear from people who are interested in that. As a reminder, as ever, we are sponsored by the Bridewell Pub. And also, if you're watching us on YouTube, do leave us a comment, do hit like, do hit subscribe. If you're listening to us on Spotify, as S. Anderson7 did tell us about Matt Woods, do leave us a comment or do leave us a rating. Right, let's get started on the show then this week, Paddy. Jake O'Brien, I wanted to talk about him this week. And I know we've probably spoken about him at various points this season, maybe after January, when it looked like he was going without potentially starting a Premier League game for us. Or it was probably before January, that wasn't it? Then when he came into the team under Moyes and looked like he was doing a job at right back or right centre back in that position, to the point now where he's scoring late equalisers at the Gladys Street. I think widely assumed that he was man of the match pretty much by anyone's book from the game at the weekend for his all-round display as well. So that goal capped it off. And as for me, I don't think it's too much of a reach to say. I mean, I don't think it's a reach at all to say that since David Moyes came into Everton, he has been the catalyst for this transformation, really. If you look at the way in which Everton have played, obviously he didn't start that first game Moyes had against Aston Villa when it felt like it was just kind of the Dice blueprint with a tiny few little bits of tweaks here and there. But since the Tottenham game when he came in and played right back, and I think a lot of people looked at the team sheet, looked at Son Heung-min and winced a little bit. Everton haven't lost a game in the Premier League, which is remarkable. And I know it's not entirely down to Jake O'Brien, but he is the common theme there. And it's weird because I think I've gone from kind of being resigned in November, December to thinking this is going to be a bit of a bust of a transfer. We're not going to know much about this lad. It's, he's going to end up going the way of other players who've come in and through the door and gone out very quickly. So maybe he's my favourite player now. It's just for the way he carries himself, the way he plays, how unorthodox he is for his position.
Yeah,
and I just love the bloke. And it was really nice to think on Saturday. Obviously, after he scored against Brentford, he kind of just gave it the stern face, not much of a celebration. I think it's probably the first time we've seen a bit of emotion and a bit of passion come out from him, where he sort of punched the air in front of the Gladys Street, and you can see that the light sort of course through him a little bit. But he is getting towards that status, I think, isn't he, where a lot of people are starting to. If you asked a lot of Evertonians now who the favourite players are in this current squad, he's been a lot of people's top three, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it does look quite idiosyncratic at times, having this 6'6" guy from Cork who is, let's be honest, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, built like a shed, like on the wing. And like sometimes the footwork that he's using to get out of tight situations and the way he's handling the ball, without sounding cliched, it's like you're into that kind of good feet through a big man territory, aren't you? Because he's so sure technically. And I wrote in my match piece from Saturday's game that was published on Monday that, like, I think it's quite rare for somebody of his physical stature and is somebody with his physical gifts to be this good technically. And obviously, Moyes initially brought him in a sort of, he calls it a false right back or a hybrid role. And basically, at times he's a third centre back, and other times he is like a genuine option at right back. I would make the argument that over the last couple of weeks, to me, he stopped looking like a lad who was playing out of position and now actually just looks like a bona fide right back. And that's one of the best compliments I can pay him. I think is every week he's looking more comfortable in that role. And he said that to us afterwards. He feels better playing there now. But we're also seeing more and more from him. So very early days, maybe he was a little bit more tentative going forward, and his best work was coming defensively. But now it's pretty usual for him to drop a shoulder or spin on a sixpence and motor past an opposition fullback. I mean, I think his crossing's improving, and when we spoke to him afterwards, he was talking about kind of the work he's doing with Leighton Baines and the other coaches on getting to the byline and picking out people at the front and back post and all that kind of stuff. And I think you can really see the progression in his game. So this is probably not an option for Everton long term. I think Moyes has been quite clear even that probably for next season, Jake O'Brien will probably be spending most of his time in the centre. What a great quality to have, that you've got a 23-year-old who's learning the ropes, can play multiple positions, and is doing so effectively. I think he's been a revelation. I think he really has. And with each passing week, you look at this and just go like, how on earth was he not getting a game, given the struggles the team had in the first half of the season and kind of the issues at right back as well.
I wouldn't be in like a huge rush to push him back in field. Like I know you could maybe look at Tarkowski at times this season and think, I think certainly for the goal of the weekend, maybe as well, he's maybe got to get out and close down a bit quicker because Souček does get a lot of time, and maybe I think he does have that tendency, and maybe it's sort of just at centre back getting a bit older, he sort of drops a lot trying to protect. That's probably why he ends up blocking quite a lot of shots. But I don't know. I think there's just something unique and I don't know, quite fun about having a player who's just so. Like if you ask someone to build like a right back in the modern day, like you would in your head, people would immediately go to players like Alexander-Arnold, maybe someone who's technically good, who could drop it to midfield, gets up and down the line, well, maybe short in stature. Like he just doesn't look anything like a right back. Like it shouldn't work in any way, shape, or form, but it does. And I think that kind of I think you saw that with the Brentford goal the other week, where the lad who came on for them, who was I think playing left wing or left wing back at that point, he just didn't have a clue what to do with him. It was a similar situation to Burn and McAllister in the cup final yesterday, where you've got this lad who's just clearly not. Yeah, it's not like he's not trying to stop him, but he's like he physically can't handle him because he's just
mismatch physically.
Yeah, and I think Moyes has always been quite good at that. I think in his Everton career, and certainly his managerial career in general. I think if you look in his first Everton spell, he put Lescott there, which is obviously the obvious example. But do you remember that time when he had Anichebe on the wing for a bit as well? And for about
or Jagielka at right back as well. Yeah,
for about 10, 15 games, like Victor on the wing really worked. And I think it was out of necessity because we had injuries, but teams just didn't know, like fullbacks just didn't know what to do with this massive lad who was charging at them. And look what he did at West Ham as well with Antonio. Like it's easy to forget he was a right back, right wing back, right winger. He's basically on the right hand side, and Moyes turned him into a striker. He did the same with Arnautovic, didn't he, when he was there as well? So I think Moyes throughout his career has often looked at these players who've got a lot of physical gifts and attributes and said, right, how can I get you to mismatch and in certain areas of the pitch? And he's doing that with O'Brien now. So listen, I think obviously he will see himself as a centre half, and the club obviously brought him in thinking that as well. But with that in mind, I wouldn't be in a huge rush to move him inside quite yet, because I just think he gives us something just unique and unorthodox in that position that a lot of teams can't quite handle.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple of points to pick up on that. The first is that because it's unconventional and is pretty rare in the modern game, that can become a strength. So, for example, we've had a couple of cases recently where there is an increased emphasis under Moyes on crosses into the box. Certainly from Harrison when he plays on the left, and Mikalenko and various others. And having that 6'6" guy at the back post, often against much smaller, diminutive fullbacks, is a great strength. And O'Brien scored 2 goals, 2 equalisers in less than a month for Everton in those kinds of areas. The other for me is that I think more than any other change Moyes has made, this one to me highlights the kind of the extra quality he possesses as a manager compared to Dyche. That kind of tactical flexibility and that ability to maximise the talent at his disposal. So I think Dyche was very rigid, and it was like, you're a centre-back, but if you're not one of my two best centre-backs, you don't play. Whereas Moyes sometimes looks at this, and maybe there's less emphasis on like a right-back actually being a right-back. We see it sometimes with Lindstrom, where it's almost hard to pin down positionally what he is in those moments, because certainly in that really good performance against Tottenham, he was a couple of things depending on the point in the game. Ilman and Dye, like nominally when you look at a lineup graphic, he's stationed on the left. But how much time is in Dye actually been playing centrally in that space closer to the penalty area, with Mikalenko much higher on the left? I mean, like, if you look at like a average positions graphic for Everton on Saturday, both fullbacks are stationed so high that in a Dyche system, they'd have probably looked like they were wingers. So I think this just goes to show that there's almost extra strings to Moyes' bow. There's things, he doesn't see the game as black and white as Dyche, and I think that's helpful here. And you've given some examples there. I've given some examples, but I think the best one is O'Brien, and it's this lad deserves minutes. I think we will see the Lescott or Jagielka blueprint with him, where he will move inside. But right now, he's playing football, doing really well. Just keep it going in the absence of top quality right back options, and he's kind of getting used to the speed and the pace of the Premier League. I mean, I can't really remember last time somebody blitzed past him on the outside or cut inside, and he's had some difficult opponents. Even looking at the weekend, I mean, they're not playing very well, West Ham, and I don't think they were great on Saturday. But you look at some of the players he's coming up against, and Emerson's in Italy international, and then you've got what I would deem to be in Paquetá, Bowen and Kudus, probably something close to a top 6 attack in terms of resources and spend. And I don't think at any point he looked overly troubled. Maybe bar one moment where Souček played somebody in. I think it was Emerson in behind. So yeah, of course he's still learning, but I think he's been one of Everton's best players over the last month. I mean, for me, it's probably him and Idrissa Gueye. Again on Saturday, but just in general over the last month, they'd be the two that I'd pick out. And yeah, just a sign for me that Moyes has got a lot more going for him tactically than Dyche, and I think we are seeing that in results and performances across the board.
100%. I think as well, where you looked at the player who was either playing nominally as a right wing back or right midfielder, which was Lindstrom in that Tottenham game, it felt like he was more of a wing back that day. And I think as Moyes has got more trust than O'Brien, he's got more trust in being an orthodox right back, in inverted commas. We've kind of moved away from that, and it feels more like just a flat back four now, 4 in front, and then you one at the top end of the pitch. So there's been a tactical adjustment, I think, as O'Brien has got more and more comfortable, but just made up for him. Just finally, you spoke to him in the mix zone. Do you get a sense he's getting more comfortable with that side of things as well, or has he always just seemed very at ease? Because he's a few weeks ago, he spoke very candidly, didn't he, about Dyche? I imagine probably a bit too candidly, maybe, for some people at the club who maybe would have looked at some of those quotes and maybe winced a little bit. But do you get a sense that he's getting a bit more in tune with the media side of things as well?
I think it's funny when you see some of these quotes written down, because obviously you strip out all context there. And actually, I was there when Jake O'Brien was talking about how frustrated he'd felt. And actually, in terms of his demeanour and his body language and the way he was saying it, he wasn't overly kind of angry or demonstrative. I would actually suggest the opposite. To me, every dealing we've had with him is he's been quite kind of softly spoken and not very demonstrative at all. He makes his point in kind of a pretty clear, concise way. It's all kind of one sentence answers, and then you come away from it thinking we've covered loads of ground here. Like, what's the standout from what he said? And you go through and you go, actually, he's made his point, but he's not done so in like a really controversial way. So I wouldn't say that he's necessarily more comfortable. I think he's more comfortable on the pitch and where he's playing. I think that we're just seeing who he is behind the scenes. I don't think normally he's not really a ranter and raver. You've seen that in some of his goal celebrations. He's been quite muted, I would argue, at certain points. maybe a bit less so on Saturday, but his first goal in front of the Gladys Street, and that means a lot. But in general, yeah, look, I think he is a good talker, and I think he's done a very good job on the pitch for Everton as well. So, yeah, all credit to him, really.
Yeah, like I said, it's got the makings of everyone's favourite player going forward, and hope he continues on that trajectory from that end of the pitch to the other end of the pitch, Paddy, and just sort of trying to throw this forward a little bit. And obviously, a lot of people excited about Yusuf Chimiti coming off the bench for 11 minutes, his first appearance of the season. How long ago does that game feel against Slacker, where he scored 2 and then got injured? It feels like 2 or 3 years ago. But remarkably, it was only last summer. But he was very, very bright, wasn't he? I think he only had 12 touches in the game, but obviously the shot, which leads to our second goal, comes from him, a good turn on his left foot. And it just wanted to be an interesting talking point to quickly look at, and in a sense of who do we think is going to be Everton's starting centre forward next year? And so I suppose there's 2 bits to this. Do you think that player is at the club already? And if that player is at the club already, who do you think it is? Because I think we can kind of rule out Breuer and Calvert-Lewin now to an extent. Like, it feels like Dom's going to leave on a free at the end of the season. I would be surprised if Breuer's permanent fee got activated, or maybe we could loan him again. But better when Chimiti feel like the obvious candidates from the current crop. And like, it's just funny that as much as Better's done really well recently, he's had a few bad games in a row, and all of a sudden, all the calls of Chimiti to start and to get a run in the team. But he was bright, wasn't he, when he came on? And I think the most noticeable thing for me watching the highlights back was that physically it looks like he's been working hard as well. Like, I think when he's played in the past, and I've seen him in the flesh, he's looked quite like what Calvert-Lewin looked like when he first came into the team, quite a wiry centre forward who maybe could get bullied by the biggest defenders.
Like Calvert-Lewin looks like now.
Yeah, yeah. But he looked big and strong, didn't he, as well, to go with that big frame he's got.
Yeah, I really liked his cameo. And to be fair, I don't think it was the only good cameo from an Everton player on Saturday. I thought Irabunam also did very well, kind of picking up the ball and driving and giving Everton a bit of a fresh impetus in central midfield. But what I did really enjoy about Chimiti in particular was that kind of duality to his game. So Calvert-Lewin at his best would be a threat in multiple different ways. He'd bully defenders and he'd win headers and flick-ons, but he'd also spin in behind and run them in behind as well. And I think we kind of saw a bit of that from Chimiti. I mean, he's the one, in essence, who makes the late chance for Alcaraz that really Alcaraz should probably score. And obviously he scuffs it in the end, goes wide. But there's also some really nice technical stuff in there. I mean, like the spin on his weaker foot for that shot that is parried and that eventually leads to the Everton goal. There's another shot that's saved as well. And I thought some of his link play was pretty interesting too. And the point I'd make there is that he's had a lot of time on the sidelines, Chimiti, and what usually happens with players there is that actually they do quite a bit of bulking in the gym. They're not able to do every single session out on the training ground, and they maybe don't get the cardio in the same way. So often they come back bigger. I mean, something similar happened with Nathan Patterson at the start of last season, and I don't think he came back looking hench by any stretch, but he certainly put on muscle and put on a bit of what I would class as positive weight in a sense. So the same seems to have happened here with Chimiti, and I think the really interesting dynamic now for Moyes is that he's gone from having one fit striker out of the 4 to 3, and all of a sudden then there's that debate, there's that dilemma. Has Beto, for example, done enough to be the starting striker until the end of the season? And then I suppose if we're pushing on, has he done enough to convince Moyes that he's the right option moving forward for Everton? The most pertinent one there with Everton safe is probably the latter. What I'd say is I don't think Beto has done enough to convince Moyes that he's the man for Everton beyond this season. By the same token, I don't think Chimiti has been on the pitch enough to do so. And Breuer certainly hasn't either. And with Calvert-Lewin's future still up in the air, and yeah, let's see how that goes, because I still think there has to be a discussion there as to what happens with him. I don't think the door would necessarily be completely closed on a new contract. You've got significant doubts over that starting position going into next season. If I'm a betting man, and maybe not for the first game of the season, but for most of Everton's matches next season, I'm probably saying that none of those four are in the line for Everton next season, which is mad when you think about it, but they've all got their own individual things going on. Breuer, injury problems. There is an option as part of his loan deal, but you're not going to activate that at, 30 million with his injury problems. Calvert-Lewin out of contract and still uncertain with his future. And Beto obviously was pretty close to leaving in January before the injury crisis struck. So if I was putting money on it, I'd probably put money on it being somebody outside of that group. And actually the one who looks best primed to come through and kind of compete with a starting striker is probably Chimiti. Based on what he's doing and what he's done, I mean, he's obviously very highly rated by the club's recruitment team and Kevin Thelwell when they bought him. Still think he is now. He just hasn't had minutes on the pitch. So let's see how it goes. I find the dynamic fascinating between now and the end of the season because you've got 3 or 4 vying for that one berth and then most of them vying for their futures too.
Yeah, I think we said a few months ago that there's a good chance that none of them are here next year. Well, obviously Chimiti would be, but maybe none of them could be starting next year. I think in an ideal world, like looking at it now, like I would assume Calvert-Lewin is going to go. I would assume Breuer's not going to be here next year. I think if you're going to play one up front, you need probably 3 centre forwards. I think you need your starter, and then I think if you've got Beto and Chimiti sort of jostling for that second that second place position, and the other one's third in the pecking order, you can potentially bring 2 of them off the bench when you're chasing the game. Yeah. I think I'm all right with that, but you need that one who's probably a level above both of them really to kind of push on. And
well, I don't think you need 4, and I actually don't think the original plan.
I think 3 would be fine, wouldn't it, for what we've got? But like you said, I imagine they would have been happy to sell Beto in January if Calvert-Lewin had not got injured.
But I also think there's a scenario where if Chimiti hadn't been fit at the start of the season and Everton had gone in with the other 3, Chimiti may well have gone on loan, because I know there was a feeling at the time that while he did very well in pre-season, what he really needs for his development is regular games at a decent level. And when you look at what Jared Branthwaite did at PSV, could you send him somewhere like that for a season where he kind of develops his game and comes on and is ready to come back the following season and really compete for that first place, for that number 9 role in the starting lineup? So I mean, if we're looking at it now, my guess is probably we'll have 1 or 2 of the 4 left come next season. But there's a lot of uncertainty there, and a lot, I would say, that's still up for grabs. And that's why it's, when we're looking for points of intrigue for the remainder of the season, that's certainly one. Like what happens in the striking department? I mean, we're very, very quickly going to get to a position where we see how much faith Moyes has in Beto, because he's now going to have 2 good young strikers on the bench in Breuer and Chimiti, and they'll be pushing for starts. I mean, yeah, really, really intrigued to see how it goes.
Yeah, and it's brutal on Breuer, but I'd sort of look at it and say, if those 2 are fit ahead of him, you're not starting any games, mate, because like you're a lone player, and you've been injured loads, and we're probably not going to sign you permanently. So you've got to protect the interests of the players who might potentially be here longer. But yeah, and I think you could even widen it out further than that. I'm obviously not going to do that right now, but you've got your centre forward, but then behind, the player who plays behind them, Decore is out of contract, and Everton haven't triggered the option on him. Alcaraz is on loan, although I think we all like him and would like him to stay. I think the consensus is Everton I've not activated that yet, and there's some talk of them potentially maybe want to negotiate a lower fee. Out wide, you've got Harrison and Lindstrom who are playing out for us at the moment, who are on loan. McNeil's injured and not been seen for months, so it's you're looking at potentially a whole revamped attack come the start of next year, which was going to take a lot of work.
Well, I would go further than that, and in quite a lot of my reporting on the the state of the squad and squad building in general over the last, I'd say, 6 to 12 months since the summer, the indications I've had are that they actually need to look at every single position. And I'm not being dramatic there, but you've already detailed 3 or 4, and you can go through every single one, even down to the goalkeeping department where João Virginia's out of contract, and they've only got one left back at the club in Mikalenko. Right back, you've got Coleman and Young out of contract, with Nathan Patterson having injury problems. So there's another one. Centre back, what happens with Jared Branthwaite, and Mason Holgate also goes, so you probably need at least one at centre back. Central midfield, Mangala's only on loan. What happens with Harrison Armstrong? Decore out of contract. Idrissa Gueye out of contract. At least 2 wingers out of contract. And then the striking situation. So, I mean, there is a case there, and certainly that's been backed up when I've had conversations. Everton need to look at every single department on the pitch. That's not an understatement. I also, going back to last week's conversation, don't think that with 15 players out of contract, they can afford to lose every single one. Because even with a big budget there, you end up splitting the big budget and having to make compromises. And actually, if the squad's going to progress, they need what you'd class as squad fillers, but some like big hitters coming into the starting lineup to like really insert some quality here. So yeah, the summer's going to be massive, and it is a rebuild. It is going to have to be basically a squad rebuild.
Yeah, and I feel like the mad thing is, like, you sort of look at, like you mentioned, West Ham's from 3 there being like top 6 quality. Like they're 15th in the league, and they've got they're 15th, and that's their front 3. And you look at that and go, well, you need players at that level, like game changers at that level, and it you know, the new recruitment team, whatever it looks like, is going to have its work cut out finding them. But yeah, we're not going to be short topics over the summer anyway. I think it's fair to say, looking at that squad build that's going to be happening. Just very quickly, our last topic today, something we've sort of spoken about in passing at the end of shows, but we've mentioned the Goodison Legacy project, and we've mentioned the potential acquisition of Nelson Dock as well. And as luck would have it, an interview dropped on Northwest Place with Colin Chong, obviously taking on his new role by going out and giving an interview. And he's been talking about the Goodison Legacy project and about Nelson Dock as well. Just to paraphrase it a bit, he said the club have always looked or had envious eyes on Nelson Dock in the past. Obviously, they've not been able to potentially stump with the funds, potentially buy it. He said, our new ownership has tasked me with looking for a sports-led redevelopment that could be accommodated on Nelson Dock, and maybe even further if we can get the right partners to invest. So that's very exciting. For people who don't know, Nelson Dock is the one, the dock adjacent to Bramley Moor Dock. And he's also given some details on the Goodison Legacy project as well, sort of indicating the potential, or the most likely potential of Goodison is hosting the women's team. So two potentially big updates, I suppose, on both those developments. I think that the women's stuff we discussed already, haven't we?
Yeah.
The potential of the women's team moving to Goodison Park, but certainly the stuff around Nelson Dock is very interesting, and indicate that Everton are, they're obviously putting roots down there anyway because they're building a stadium, but they want to extend their footprint on that part of the city, which is exciting.
Yeah, I described those comments from Colin Chong, which were during a kind of public forum in which he was a speaker. I described them as kind of putting more flesh on the bone as to what was already out there. I mean, we've covered on this show our reporting at The Athletic over the women's team and Goodison Park being a potential venue for them, home ground for them. And then I think going even further back, I mean, not my story, but my colleague Matt Slater had done something on Nelson Dock, and that was late last year, I believe. So these rumours have been going on for a while, but what I think was really interesting was first of all, was the appointment of Colin Chong in this sort of dual role where he looks at what's happening with Goodison and how Everton with TFG can push the development of Bramley Moor on in other parts of the North Liverpool docks. In what he said there about a sports-led development, I think they're fairly commonplace in the US in particular, but we probably don't have loads of reference points over here as to what that looks like. I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, Wembley has a bit of stuff around it. The Etihad In Manchester, you have an athletics track, athletics arena, and then the new Co-op Live venue for music. But I don't think it's been really successfully done anywhere else. And maybe that kind of American tilt is going to come in useful here, because it's fairly common over there. And it potentially opens up a whole new revenue stream, a whole load of avenues for Everton. So on that sports-led development, you can have everything. You could have hotels and bars, but you could also have the opportunity to access, in theory, and to access the ground from a different point, which I think would be advantageous when you look at the geography down there as it is at the moment and how closed off it is. We've also got the potential for other sports development. So I think it is exciting. I think it's another, I call it, and I'm not trying to be demeaning here, but it feels like the professionalisation of Everton at the top of the club. I mean, they're obviously the people who were there before and are there now are all professionals, but I mean, like, hyper professional in terms of the opportunities they're looking at. Look at the way, for example, the debt situation was addressed, and while it's still an issue, it's far less of an issue than it was, and will help PSR calculations moving forward. The ease with which some of these changes have been made, and the restructuring at the top of the club, it feels like we're in a whole new era with Everton under TFG, and that's the exciting bit for me, because it feels like for a long time Everton have been at various points butting up against that glass ceiling, but other times just not even being able to get that high and that far. Whereas now, like, you just open up loads of possibilities under new ownership with a new stadium, fresh direction, and seemingly competent people looking into these pretty exciting opportunities and development.
Yeah, like I think the really interesting line from that forum you mentioned there is that Colin Chong said, "Our owners are very keen to secure." Nelson Doctor said, and he goes on to say, "If I was given a wish list, that would be top of it: secure Nelson Dock and protect the asset that we've just redeveloped, just developed." Like that, like you said, that is those are the words of somebody who has got ambition and is sort of not coming up against that scene. Because I imagine the messaging throughout the football club for the past 3 years or so, while they've been, up against the wall financially, and there's been point deductions in PSR and concerns about every single penny spent. Can you imagine how liberating it must be to have a lot of that swept away? Albeit you still got to be cautious, but all of a sudden you can start being ambitious again. You can start saying, not just how are we going to build this stadium, how are we going to fund this, how are we going to fund that, how can we do this and make it better and expand, and to use the phrase that Colin Chong does there, protect the asset. And like that must be so invigorating for him and his team that they can start doing that again after so many years of just penny pinching.
Well, I think it's the same across the club. I mean, what we have to remember is that the club was straining to get by day to day, week to week, and in some cases straining to pay those bills. And what that meant was that just about everything, apart from the very essential stuff, had fallen by the wayside. I mean, there's next to no investment in the academy, next to no investment in infrastructure over the last years, very little investment in the first team, as we know. And even if we take the immediate kind of first team matters out of the equation, there's loads of areas there where Everton might want to push on under kind of new moneyed ownership. I mean, very early days from the Friedkin group, you had talk about improving facilities at Finch Farm. You had talk about improving the women's infrastructure, and obviously we've heard a bit about that since. The same, in theory, could happen down on Bramley Moor, but now, because of the financial situation of the club, they don't have to prioritise, really. They can, in some ways, look to do all of this and to push all of it on, and in essence to become, in aspiration and ambition, a top club in terms of the way they act again, because they haven't been, have they? They've had to think small and they've had to just get by. That's the fascinating and really exciting bit for me.
Yeah, definitely. Get a nice arena built down there or something. I don't know. It's just exciting. Like what could the mind sort of boggles of what they could potentially do down there, but it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Less exciting, Paddy, this week is our squad number section. The number 33 has not been a classic number for Everton players. I think it's
Right.
fair to say. I text you before saying, "Oh my god, the numbers this week." With the last, I'm just going to rattle through them. I've got a couple of interesting stories about a couple of them. So the last wearer was Salomon Rondon. Before him, we had loads of goalies. We had Robin Olsen, João Virginia, Joel Robles, then Callum Connolly, Adam Forshaw wore it for a bit. Then Stefan Vessels, and then before him were Edan Tal, John Joe O'Toole, and Jamie Spear, who was a goalkeeper apparently. Just the two I wanted to mention there was Salomon Rondon. I'll never forget his red card against Brentford when he did the 2-footer tackle in the game we lost 3-2. I think he ran off the pitch and applauded the fans. Like, mate, you just got yourself suspended for a really key game against Palace coming up, but thankfully all was all right. And one of my other favourite ones is Stefan Vessels, and friend of ours, Jack Carlisle, told me a story once that there was a rumor going around his school that Stefan Vessels had a wooden hand.
What? He used to live very close to me in Egbert, Stefan Vessels.
Did you see him with his wooden hand at any point or not?
Oh, it'd have been terrifying at that age for me. I mean, my Stefan Vessels story isn't about a wooden hand, but I suppose he may as well have had one in the cup game. He got lobbed from about 30 yards against Oldham, didn't he?
Yeah, I remember that.
In a cup game that Everton lost at Goodison. And just, it was quite clearly like they had a string of number twos, didn't they? Who were below Tim Howard and were never going to get a game unless something happened to Howard or unless he needed a breather in the cups. And probably Stefan Vessels was one of the very worst of them in terms of his ability as a keeper. I mean, like, even Jan Muka had the what's the name of the guy in? Is it the Monk, the goalkeeper in?
Me Machine.
Yeah. He had the kind of the Monk thing about him with like the shaved head, and he'd like jump into mad tackles, and he'd just do crazy stuff. Whereas I think Stefan Vessels was just a complete lame duck, really. So, I mean, I can't verify the rumor that went around Jack's school, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, he may as well have had one.
Yeah, not a classic number selection, that one this week. But if you've got any stories about any of those players, if you've got any rumours about Everton players that went around your school that were wild, that we can read out on here, do email us them as well. Be interested to hear. Did you see Stefan Vessels' wooden hand at any point when he was kicking around Egbert? Let us know on all of that. But no, on a serious note, if you've got any questions for us next week, it's evertonbyline@gmail.com. If you're interested in potentially working with us and helping us with our social media, if you're young, hip and cool and know all the tricks of the social media trade, unlike me and Paddy, drop us a line. It'd be great to get somebody involved. Watch us on YouTube. Do hit like, do hit subscribe, leave us a comment on anything we've spoken about today. Same on Spotify. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review. And yeah, we are sponsored by the Bridewell. As ever, 2.5 weeks to get down there. Great to see some of the Baltimore Toppies, I think, were in there on Friday night enjoying themselves. So yeah, it's becoming another little haven in the city for Evertonians, which is great to see. But yeah, we'll be back again next week for episode 34, answering your questions. So get them in over the course of the next 7 days. Up the Toppies. We'll speak to you again soon.